Hello and welcome to this edition of Wineskins, a program that features reflections on the lives of the saints and sacred scriptures, along with information on topics and issues from a Catholic perspective. I'm Father Jim Korda. Wineskins is brought to you by the annual Bishop's Appeal, the Catholic Communication Campaign, and St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts, a division of the Society of St. Paul. On our show today, I will interview Msgr Jim Kolp on the 75th anniversary of the Diocese of Youngstown. We will also look at the life of St. Dominic, as well as reflections on the readings for this 18th Sunday in Ordinary Time. That and more coming up on Wineskins. In our current issue, I will speak with Thomas Awiapo from Ghana. Joining me now again is Thomas Awiapo from Ghana with Catholic Relief Services. Welcome back to Wineskins.
Thank you.
When you were here last time, actually, I believe it was Easter Sunday, this past Easter Sunday, and you shared some wonderful stories about your work with CRS, but also how CRS really touched you as an individual and how you in turn have really gone out to share that story with other people, especially people here in the United States. What would you like to tell the people in the United States again about Catholic Relief Services?
Catholic Relief Services, for me, it's a gospel of love and a gospel of hope for millions around the world. Catholic Relief Services is one of the biggest humanitarian and development agency of the Catholic community of the United States, working in 112 countries around the world, reaching out to 121 million people a year. But you see, those figures are so huge, sometimes they can sound vague. But I want to say that beyond those vague, huge figures are real people like me, real faces like me, whose lives have been impacted by the work of Catholic Relief Services. Usually, Catholic Relief Services goes into any country at the invitation by the church and with permission of that government. And before Catholic Relief Services then goes into a country, it does a baseline survey and needs assessment in that country, working with the local people. And based on the findings, Catholic Relief Services then builds different interventions and programs that will address those prioritized needs in that particular country. So the different countries have different programs depending on the needs in that country. For instance, in my country, currently, the programs that are being run include agriculture. Now, the country itself has been brought to understand the value of school feeding. So the government of Ghana has taken over school feeding and is embarking and has owned it and is working on it at a different level. But it took Catholic Relief Services to come and walk with us, dialogue with us, and show us the way that what it takes a child who walks 10 miles to go to school is a school lunch and a little snack. And they are doing that beautifully. So they are now helping farmers in agricultural programs to be able to produce bigger yields and using better farming methods to food production. There is also maternal child health programs to ensure that no mother dies in the process of giving life. So we are providing all equipment, all the community orientation and sensitization about using the clinics and to get pregnant women to give birth in the clinics, to avoid maternal and infant mortality and all that. We also have microfinance. We call it savings and internal lending communities, where we bring these women together to save money and give out loans and create their own interests. And by that, they are able to build up their economic status. You know, women are kind of disadvantaged because when they don't have enough economic whatever. So we realize that women, when they are resourced, the whole family can benefit. We are into that, helping women to be able to save and loan and get engaged in businesses that work better in their little places. Maybe other countries may be different. In Haiti right now, Catholic Relief Services is still working on rebuilding and recreating all that and getting all kids back in the schools and working well, in the hospitals, things working well. So Catholic Relief Services, when they work in countries, it's all about the principle of subsidiarity. It's about sustainability. They have to do it in a way that the people will become eventually self-reliant, giving a voice to the voiceless, not just being a voice for the voiceless. And it's working well.
And what would you tell the folks that are with us how they can help?
Well, as I said, I know that I'll always go back to the power of prayer, praying for the work, praying for all the good people who work for Catholic Relief Services overseas and within this country, that they may be inspired by that spirit of global solidarity, so that they can walk with people and all that. Because it's all about the conversion of hearts and minds, to know that we are all in this, and God blessed all of us in different ways so that we can share these blessings with one another. And it's only in that way we can create this wonderful global human community where we can all realize our potential. But CRS.org is where you can find every other programs to be able to follow and support Catholic Relief Services. You have resources for parishes, resources for schools, resources for families. Every generation can participate in the good works of CRS. There is also advocacy, because the United States, we are a big country, blessed with resources, with everything, human and material resources, and whatever policies you make in this country definitely affect the rest of the world.
Thomas Awiapo, we thank you so much for being with us again, and thank you for the work you do with Catholic Relief Services. We let the folks that are with us know that they can go to crs.org for more information, and God bless you in your travels and also in the wonderful work that you do.
Thank you for having me.
For Wineskins, I'm Father Jim Korda. This coming Wednesday, the Church celebrates the Feast of St. Dominic. To tell us more is Barb Zorn. She is from Holy Family Church in Poland.
Born of the noble Guzman family in Spain, Dominic received his early education at Palencia and then became an Augustinian canon at the Cathedral of Osma. At the age of 24, he accompanied his bishop on a mission to Denmark that took him through southern France. There they came face to face with many heretics. They immediately began an apostolate of preaching. Bishop Diego returned to Spain to recruit more preachers, but he died while there, and Dominic was left practically alone to carry on the preaching ministry. In 1215, he founded a monastery of cloistered nuns near Toulouse, who would support the preaching ministry by their prayers. By 1217, the year in which Pope Honorius II confirmed the name and mission of the Order of Preachers, they had taken up residence at the Church of Saint Romain in Toulouse, thanks to the kindness of Bishop Volk. The papal bulls approving the Order of Preachers were issued by Pope Honorius III in 1218. Dominic adopted the rule of St. Augustine as the rule of life and borrowed for the primitive Dominican constitutions. In those constitutions, he placed great emphasis on personal and community poverty, the ministry of preaching, and the study of sacred scripture. St. Dominic stipulated that the constitutions as such do not bind under sin, and that superiors have the power to grant dispensations. Although the friars lived a monastic life, Dominic stated that the purpose of the order was preaching for the salvation of souls. Very soon there were Dominican friars in Paris, Madrid, Rome, and Bologna. St. Dominic always preferred to make foundations in university cities, but he was also greatly an influence in the foreign missions. By July 1218, Dominic was in Italy, where he preached in numerous cities, organized the monastery of nuns at St. Sixtus in Rome, and received from the Pope the Basilica of Santa Sabina, which is still the headquarters of the Dominican order. He was also designated as the Master of the Sacred Palace, and to this day a Dominican holds that office. While on a preaching mission in northern Italy, Dominic was stricken with his last illness. He died in the midst of his brethren at Bologna, promising them that he would be of more use to them in heaven than if he were to remain with them. It was the evening of the feast of St. Sixtus in 1221. As he was dying, Dominic said to the friars that his heritage to them was fraternal charity, humility, and voluntary poverty. Pope Gregory IX said of him, "I knew him as a steadfast follower of the apostolic way of life. There is no doubt that he is in heaven, sharing the glory of the apostles themselves." The relevance of St. Dominic to our age is the importance of the ministry of the Word, whether preaching, teaching, or writing. The Second Vatican Council has stated that preaching is the primary ministry of bishops and priests. It is also the command of Christ himself, who said, "Preach the good news to all nations." For Wineskins, I'm Barb Zorn.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Spotlight. I'm Father Jim Korda. During this series, we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Diocese of Youngstown. And joining me in today's show is Msgr. Jim Kolp. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And I think before the taping, you had mentioned that this is really one of your first times here in the studios at CTNY.
It
so
is.
We welcome you in a special way today.
Yes, and you do a very fine job. It's
Thank
very
you.
interesting.
Thank you. We're pleased to do it, and thank you for sharing our ministry with us.
You're welcome.
You know, I think the folks that are with us would like to get to know you a little bit more. So if you could share some of that with those folks, and also in relationship to what we're celebrating this year, the 75th anniversary, and how you recall past anniversaries of the diocese.
Okay, I'd be happy to, Father. I went to St. Paul's grade school in North Canton, then to St. John High School in Canton. Hitchhiked for 4 years from North Canton to Canton with my brother, and we had 2 English boys who lived with us at that time. So then in my senior year, around March of that year, I was invited to, actually I had gone up to see my cousin who was secretary to Bishop McFadden for some years, and told him that I was interested in being a priest. So he helped me along, and then in March I was invited to go to Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit. I did that, started out at Sacred Heart Seminary in March of the year 1943, and you know, things went along regularly, and within 2 months we got word that something was happening. A new diocese was being formed. And of course, you know, Canton, actually one of the main streets in Canton is Cleveland Avenue, so our direction was always in Cleveland. We weren't exactly sure where Youngstown was, or very much about it. It was very exciting, and there were a number of young men from our 6-county area who were studying at that time. So then the diocese began, and Bishop McFadden, of course, was chosen as the first bishop. When he came to the diocese, sort of interesting, he came by train, and the train would go to a town in our diocese. It would stop, and he would get out, and there would be many, many people from that city in that area greeting him. I remember being in Warren when the train stopped there, and there were just lots and lots of people there. And so Bishop McFadden was our first bishop. So he had Msgr. Kopp, Father Kopp was his secretary, Father Heinrich was his chancellor, and so the diocese began with, you know, just a lot of excitement and a lot of interest by a lot of people.
Tell us what you remember most about Bishop McFadden. Was there anything that stood out in your recollections of him as a young man?
Yes, well, I knew a bit about Bishop McFadden for many years because I had a cousin who was a priest. His name was Vincent Belmont, and he was secretary to Bishop McFadden for some years. So I knew about him, and of course, from the very beginning, we realized he was a very, very wonderful person, communicated very well with people and with the priests, was very interested in doing all he could to make our 6-county area a very special place. He chose St. Columba in downtown Youngstown as the cathedral, and as I say, he used to do some writing. For example, some years into the diocese, he decided that we should have a book called The March of the Eucharist, which was a description of all the parishes in the diocese and the various others. So that was very, very interesting. I was just looking at mine recently, and it has a lot of interesting history in it.
It does. It's interesting because as we celebrate anniversaries here in the diocese, you obviously recall the 25th and the 50th and now our 75th. what comes to mind often is that maybe we should publish again another March of the Eucharist, because if you look at that book, there are a number of parishes that are here in the Diocese of Youngstown that are not in the March of the Eucharist because they were not established at that time. So wouldn't it be wonderful to kind of recreate something like that for future generations, especially as we look toward our 100th anniversary?
Yes, I think that would be a very fine idea.
I'd like to talk about another book, and that is the book that I believe you wrote on Lyndon Smith. Tell us about him and briefly about the book.
Okay, Father Eli Washington John Lindesmith. And I suppose one reason I was interested in him because he baptized my grandfather in New Berlin, which is now North Canton, Ohio. It was called New Berlin until the First World War. Father Lindesmith was a man who, his family lived right close to Lisbon in Columbiana County. His father was Protestant and his mother was Catholic. So they decided we'll raise the boys Protestant and the girls Catholic. So it turns out that his father passed away very young. And then he began to go to the Catholic Church. Eventually decided to go to the seminary. He was the first American-born young man who was ordained for the Diocese of Cleveland. Was pastor in parishes in the Diocese of Cleveland, including St. John's, Canton, Ohio, that's where he also served New Berlin or North Canton when my grandfather was just a youngster. Then he was sent to Lithonia as pastor, and when he was in Lithonia, the Bishop of Cleveland invited him to be a priest in the Indian Wars. This was around 1880. So he left the diocese, went to Montana to become a chaplain in the Indian Wars. He met many Indian chiefs. He took very good care of the military that he was responsible for, and he wrote down everything so that when I was writing this book, just had to follow his many, many writings. Most of them are at Catholic University in Washington because he left a lot of the material there. But a very fascinating person.
For more information on that current issue and to listen to Wineskins, visit the website of the Catholic Diocese of Youngstown at www.doi.org. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
In a corner of rural New Mexico, children play in a daycare center. Not long ago, their days were very different. While parents worked in the fields, children stayed home alone or sat in a car in the heat of the day. Now they're learning, playing, safe and well-fed because 5 women dreamed of decent daycare and made it a reality. 1 in 6 American children lives in poverty, but we can help them live in hope. Find out how at povertyusa.org. A message from the Catholic Campaign for Human Development.
The song we have for you today is from the CD called the 40th Anniversary Edition of Earthen Vessels. It is by the St. Louis Jesuits, and you can find this and more albums at ocp.org.
If God is for us, who can be against? If the Spirit of God has set us free. If God is for us, who can be against? If the Spirit of God has set us free. I know that nothing in this world can ever take us from His love. If God is for us, who can be against? If the Spirit of God has set us free. If God is for us, who can be against? If the Spirit of God has set us free. Nothing can take us from His love, poured out in Jesus the Lord. If God is for us, who can be against? If the Spirit or to come can ever take us from His love. God is for us, who can be against? If the Spirit of God has set us free. God is for us, who can be against? If the Spirit of God has set us free.
And to tell us about the scriptures for this 18th Sunday in Ordinary Time is Father Scott Kopp. He is the Associate Pastor of St. Michael Church in Canton.
We complain because we don't understand. We don't understand, and so we ask questions. Throughout our life of faith, we continue to question. We are begging for answers at times, begging for truth. We ask these questions of each other, but really, we are all beggars. Who then can give us the answers? Bishop Robert Barron gives a wonderful definition of Christianity that he himself read from the early part of the 20th century. The definition is this: Christianity is like a beggar telling another beggar where to find the bread. If you have worked in any volunteer capacity at a shelter, soup kitchen, or Catholic Charities, you will know that the poor and homeless have a wonderful network amongst themselves. They know where all the local places are to get a free meal or clothing, and what times they are open. If a new person comes into their community, they share this information. They know that if you go to St. Stephen's at 3 p.m. on Mondays, you will get a hot meal with nice people serving it. Yet they remain beggars, still unable to provide the meal itself. The first reading takes us back to the early Israelites in the desert. They are beggars now themselves. They have only been free of Egypt for a month, and they are already complaining. Luckily for them, God doesn't answer people's grumbling with punishment, but feeds them with what they truly need. Even when the gift of bread from heaven comes, they question the gift. In Hebrew, manhu, the manna in the desert, means, what is this? Lost in a desert, they must learn to rely on God for the very food that will keep them alive. We continue to complain and grumble at times in our own lives. Why is life like this? Where is God? Why doesn't God take care of us more? We complain because we don't understand. Even in spite of years of blessing from God in our lives, and an understanding of all of salvation history, we can still grumble. We are never happy, never satisfied. We forget so quickly. Yet in our grumbling, God again does not punish. He continues to feed us with what we need. Following last week's miracle story of the feeding of the 5,000, John's Gospel begins the Bread of Life discourse, which the Church provides in the lectionary over the course of the next 4 weeks. The crowds searched for Jesus because he fed them. The miracles got their attention. The words resonated in their hearts. They came for more miracles, more words, more bread. We don't judge those who come into our churches for the first time either. They come for many reasons, some perfect and some imperfect, but they are all searching for something, and they all have questions. Something attracts them at first, something they can't explain. Is it the beauty of the church, of the Mass? Is it the truth expressed, the mystery revealed, the community that embraces them? Is it the music or the preaching? For many, we start with the basics. We feed them. We tend to their basic human needs. Don't worry, they will eventually ask the questions. Why are you like this? Where did you get this? Why are you doing this? Then you can introduce the higher truths. Don't let them settle for the perishable bread, but guide them to the bread of eternal life. The crowd following Jesus saw the miracle of bread. They have a partial faith, which leads them to start questioning and seeking Jesus. They only saw the sign, but did not understand the meaning behind it. So they asked for more signs. They desperately want to believe, but don't understand. They are begging for meaning and truth in their lives. And if we are honest, we really don't completely understand either. We keep begging as well, but we have experienced part of the answer. As with all the sacraments, the sign points to the reality. The sign of the bread and wine points to the reality of Jesus Christ. This reality exists in the words spoken, in the community assembled, and most especially in the Eucharist shared. And because we have received this Eucharist, we are then transformed by its grace into Jesus Christ. The sign is our own joy, our own lives. We are called then not to be the complainer or the grumbler. We are called to be the joy, to be the Eucharist, to be Jesus. Yet as beggars and not providers of the bread, we at times forget as well. We at times question and complain. The only answer is an ongoing connection with Jesus. The manna in the desert was given daily. The Israelites received from God what they needed for each day. We should hear connections with the Lord's Prayer, where we pray that God gives each of us our daily bread. Our daily bread is what we need each day, what we need for the coming day, what we need for the eternal day. It is the Eucharist and all the meanings and realities that come with it. The Jews asked Jesus for a repeated giving of bread, a bread they could receive again and again. What Jesus offered them and us is the once and for all bread. With this bread we will never hunger or thirst again. We do this by staying connected to Jesus. It is an ongoing feeding where there is no time for hunger. Stay connected to Jesus so that others can stay connected to you. As a beggar yourself, let all the other beggars know where the bread is. For until they understand Jesus himself, you may be the only Jesus they know. For Wineskins, I'm Father Scott Kopp.
Bread is a necessity of life. It is the symbol of the essential. Jesus is a necessity of the Christian life. He is the essential element of our life and worship. He is a friend of the hungry, the bread of life. Does Jesus fulfill your hunger for life? Wineskins is made possible through the annual Bishop's Appeal, the Catholic Communication Campaign, and St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts. Our program is produced by CTNY, the Catholic Telecommunications Network of Youngstown. I'm Father Jim Korda, thanking you for being with us today. Have a blessed week.